Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare.
All right, well, here we are, Wednesday night. Where am I? What are we doing? It's good to be back home. Bit of travel, quite a bit this month, so good to be home. So before we get into the text, I just wanted to touch base and see if anyone here was able to watch the teaching from last week. I know there's technical difficulties, so it was posted on the community. And I'm guessing some people may not have been able to watch it, so it might be helpful for me to tap back into that. So, anyone watch it?
I mean, Dusty got it running last week. It just took a bit, but we
Yeah,
watched most of it.
yeah. So Dusty was able to share the teaching that I had given him. However, that was the incorrect one. It wasn't the one from last week.
Was the wrong one.
Yeah, so it was September teaching. Hopefully you found it meaningful. Uh, so, okay, then we'll just tap back into this. But I would like tonight to be really practical. I'd love for a little bit of discussion. As we get into this section of the text, it's very heady and it's tapping into how do we really gain some understanding, some direct perception of things that are not so obvious to us. And so the really method and approach of understanding how to look deeply into things that are not very apparent. How do we ultimately understand ourselves, emptiness, selflessness, and so forth. And so I think this first section I'll just tap into. That's what I did record last week and did not give the correct link to. And so, yeah, let's just pop into that. And then we'll have a discussion around that. Sorry, wrong link there. Here we go. So in this section, we're gaining non-deceptive knowledge. And so that's going to give a framework with which we can look more deeply into the very nature of experience, the nature of reality, and some methods to do so. So it gets a little bit heady. I don't know that we'll go into all of it. I think I'm going to be very picky about what we share because for our practice to be relevant, it needs to help us today. It needs to be something that we can really notice. What's the afflictive states I have? Is this helpful and meaningful in my life? Is there something I can do with this? Direct experience is going to be an opportunity for us to have some actual faith in what we're doing, some real refuge. So, this first section is a real nice way to approach that. Does look like I have a chat question. Okay, great. So we did have someone who did get to see the teaching. Thanks. So we'll just take a peek here, gaining non-deceptive knowledge. One of the key points here is how do we have any faith in what's being taught to us? How do we have faith in that this is a good use of our time? And one thing that is critical in Buddhist teachings is that we don't just take things on just blind faith. That's going to get us absolutely nowhere. We don't, oh, great teacher, wonderful teachings. I've seen a lot of people, their lives look better. This is the path. not going to get you very far. We need to be honest with where we're at. And we might be at a place where I would just like to be a little more comfortable in my life. And that's where we're at. That's totally fine. We might be at a place in our lives where, yeah, we've explored, we've done some practice, we've explored different spiritual traditions. We recognize that this can really attenuate some suffering in my life. And that's really meaningful. We might be at a place where I recognize that the true causes of my suffering are these mental afflictions, which are in my consciousness. Sorry, apparently my little phone's blowing up. But the point is, the thought that, well, I'm ready to be a bodhisattva, I'm taking these vows for a lifetime, I'm going to dedicate my life to the benefit of all beings. It's a wonderful aspiration, but how real is that for you? We just said this nice refuge prayer, right? And we take refuge, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and through these positive potentials that are created through these 6 perfections: generosity, ethics, patience, effort, concentration, and wisdom. May I free all sentient beings. That's an aspiration we're nurturing. But we can have that great aspiration and then get frustrated when we're on hold for 15 minutes. There's a little detachment there. I'm willing to take on these lifetimes of effort for the benefit of all beings, but you're trying to put me on hold for 20 minutes, or I can't talk to a regular person trying to navigate a phone system, and I'm angry. So we've got to think, well, okay, where am I really at? Where am I really at? Maybe I'm learning to have a little more patience. Maybe I'm learning to recognize that how I'm engaged in the world is not just the most beneficial way. So it's nice to have these aspirations. It's wonderful. It's seeds we want to grow, motivations we want to nurture. But then, is that just this ideal or something I say before I practice, or is it something I do on a cushion? Versus how do I live my life, the rest of the day? And so in that regard, it's going to be really critical for us to be authentic with where we are and acknowledge where our capacity is, as well as where we would like to go. So yes, I'd like to be a bodhisattva. I'd like to, dedicate every activity I do for the benefit of all beings, see every single action and interaction as an opportunity to develop my mind and my heart in ways of a path of a bodhisattva. Except when somebody pisses me off, in which case, not so much. Or that other political party does this. So I'm bringing this to mind because it's thoroughly not just okay, but very important to be where we're at and to allow this process to unfold so that there becomes a firm, deeply rooted faith based on experience and experimentation that then becomes the actual causes for a bodhisattva. And we start with investigation. So let's begin there in the text. Pop that back up, and many of you may have seen this quote that is coming up. So this is really starting to look at how do we explore the very nature of reality. 3 objects and their cognizers. So three objects that we can experience, and the cognizer, that which is experiencing it. So as we learn the Buddha Dharma, we are exposed to new concepts that may challenge our view of the world and of reality. We may wonder how to go about verifying and disproving them. So, Santra, Centauri, man, I was able to say Santarcitas. I struggled with that twice last week. Santarcitas. Thank you, Brad. Compendium on Reality quotes the Buddha as recommending an analytical approach. Do not accept my Dharma merely out of respect for me, but analyze and check it the way a goldsmith analyzes gold by burning, cutting, and rubbing it. So the approach here from step one is we really need to test this. The Buddha said, when asked, how do we know your teachings are the ultimate ones, the right ones? He said, you don't know. You have to test them. That's for you to find out. So, the point being made here is just as a goldsmith's going to check for external impurities, which can be detected, right? Obviously, with some testing by burning the gold, cutting it, and so forth. He's ultimately going to search for very subtle impurities using a special technique of filing the gold. Similarly, we must test the teachings thoroughly, looking for three types of impurities: incorrect explanations regarding evident phenomena, slightly obscure phenomena, and very obscure phenomena. If there are none, we can accept the teachings with confidence. Each of the three types of phenomena is known by a specific kind of reliable cognizer. So when we approach this path, it's important to remember that the Buddha basically taught one thing, that all of this suffering is coming from misunderstanding. We just don't perceive things accurately. And there are countless methods to remove these obscurations, to experience the nature of reality. And there's different lineages, different paths, different spiritual traditions. It's not that there's this one right path or this one right way, but rather a multitude of methods. It's not about the method as much as does the method provide a result. And so all of us will have an opportunity to engage with the Buddha Dharma with different methods, with certain teachings, ones that may be more productive for you than others. But all of them, in regard to finding a method that works, is going to help us engage with understanding the ultimate truth of things. So here we're coming into these three types of objects, and are we going to find fault or not? Is it going to be accurate or not? And so here we bring in a very clear way of approaching the things we perceive. Obviously, the things that are a little obscure and the things that are very obscure. And they'll give us some explanations of each and what would be reliable around that. How can we go about knowing these phenomena? Sounds fun, doesn't it? Okay. So evident phenomena, this one's the easiest here. Those are ordinary beings. Those are that ordinary beings can easily perceive. These include external objects such as colors, sounds, odors, tastes, and tangible objects, which are known by a direct, reliable cognizer that correspond to our five physical senses, and internal objects such as feelings of happiness, pain, hopes, and desires, which are known by mental consciousnesses. So that's what we're observing, right? So I'm observing Rebecca. I can reliably, see, observe, experience Rebecca, talk to her. And so this is pretty easy, right? There's not much obscuring here. Slightly obscure phenomena cannot initially be directly perceived. Ordinary beings must initially know them by factual inferential cognizers. Inferential reliable cognizers based on valid factual reasons. So essentially it's going to be something that we observe, that we see, but now we need to use some reasoning to understand a little bit. The example that I'll give here is around an apple, right? The fact that an apple arises in dependence upon causes and conditions is part of the conventional nature of the apple. You look at an apple, you don't necessarily know about it, its impermanence, how it came from a seed and became this apple and then it'll fade. You don't know that right away. We need to observe and reason and understand the coming into being of an apple and it going. Most people just, especially your kid, it's an apple. You don't even know it's an apple, it's something. And so these more obscure phenomena is even just our own impermanent nature. I feel a lot like same person yesterday, but there's a lot that's going on within me and changing moment to moment. But we can figure it out. They'll use things like, there's an example that they use here in the text about the sun setting in the west, right? I can see that it sets in the west. That's evident. But to understand its nature, its subtle, changeable nature, we use some reasoning, right? It rose in the east. It was there. It is there. So we might infer, okay, that it moves. But on a deeper level, who's really moving, right? The Earth's moving. Now that's very obscure. That's very obscure. I mean, there's no way that we know we're moving. I'm not even sure how fast we're turning, but we're pretty fast, right? It doesn't feel like it. But that would be very subtle, obscure phenomenon, right? We're looking and we see the sun or the moon, and we think it's moving, and we're moving. But there's no way that we would know that just objectively, standing here and where we are. So that's going to lead to this really subtle, obscure phenomenon. So to know a slightly obscure phenomenon such as selflessness, or what I just talked about with the fact that the Earth's moving, for example, the absence of a permanent independent solar self, we might use the reasoning of dependence and contemplate the syllogism, consider a person. She does not exist as permanent, partless, under its own power, soul, or self, because she depends on her body and mind. Okay? So we can get that there's not going to be a sense of self without a body and mind, and that it's going to be dependent. It's not independent. So reasoning, we can figure that out. Getting to this very obscure phenomena. Well, they're known by ordinary sentient beings, and they're making a point that there's different cognizers for an ordinary sentient beings. This is going to be very obscure. To an arhat, it's not obscure at all. So different cognizers, just where we're at in our experience. So by sentient beings, we're relying on inferential, reliable cognizers by authoritative testimony. The testimony of someone who is authoritative in that field. And I love their first example. We know our birthday by asking our mother. She's pretty authoritative, right? I was there, but I can't really tell you when my birthday was. So we're going to need to depend on an authority. Mom was there and can sit there and tell us when we were born. I can't know that any other way. There's no way for me to know when I was born other than through someone telling me. We can understand the subtle intricacies of karma by depending on the Buddhist teaching. So now we're going to need an authority to explain something that, I don't directly know. So while atoms and subatomic particles are slightly obscured phenomenon that can be known by inference, most of us rely on the testimony of scientists to know their existence and characteristics. And so, again, like even the earth moving, I'm pretty much depending on the authorities that have, taught me that. I can't really check it out myself. But I feel pretty confident in that science. So here it's giving us an approach. Okay, there's some things I can directly perceive. I can know from my own experience whether it's valid or not. I can get into more subtle things. That we can work out math problems. We can work out formulas. I can check things out and use some reasoning, and it does add up, or it doesn't add up. Those are doable, but really to tap into the very empty nature of phenomena, to very subtle ways of like karma. How do we know about karma, cause, effect, and about the fact that whether I'm experiencing the taste of a strawberry is delicious has to do with karma and not the strawberry. Well, okay, I'm going to need to rely on a teaching, and that teaching needs to come from an authority, but I need to trust that that authority is giving me, accurate information and that they're qualified. So therein lies going to be a real investigation around the authority that I'm trusting. And that's not just because so-and-so, has all these credentials, great Buddhist teacher, or the Dalai Lama is this wonderful teacher, and, he's my authority. I'm going to need to have worked my way through some of the more subtle, obscured knowing to get to having some experience where I can really trust some of the information being given me and incrementally test it. And so there's also going to be some opportunities to kind of check around, well, are there other people from this teacher and what are they like? Do they have some peace and ease in their life? Are they loving and kind? Are they judgmental? Do they have the qualities I would like? So then it's not just this teacher, but we can start checking out what are the students like? People who have engaged in these types of teachings, what are they like? And then we can start exploring whether the teachings are helpful in some way or not. There can be teachers and Dharma groups where an incredible amount of kindness, clarity, peace, and ease exist. And there can also be some that have some controversy and real difficulties within the teacher teachings and the students. So all of these need to be checked out, not simply because they're this teacher with this lineage and, this credential. And it's going to be critical for us to move step by step in a way that is meaningful and finding what doesn't make sense to us now, and maybe it's might make sense to us later, then we just set that aside rather than say, well, it was said to be so, and I'm going to take that. It's in the Dalai Lama's book. Okay. Not a way to engage in the Dharma. So this comes around to the point that I was starting with, is to be where we're at. And it's perfectly okay to say, I don't know. When we do the refuge prayer at the start, you'll hear me say, for those of you who care to, join me in the refuge prayer. If you're not ready to do that, no need to do that. Be where you're at. Engage in this with a methodical approach. And start checking these three objects of phenomena, right? The ones we can observe, the ones that are slightly obscure, and the ones that are, very obscure. And understand that these teachings and this path is a process of accessing directly the very obscure. Because ultimately, the answer is for you to know it directly. And so there's a path to get to that process. And what I'm trying to hammer down so hard is that foundational path to get to there needs to be one that we have an incredible amount of faith and reliability in to take the next step. So it really needs to be authentic and honest with who we are, where we're at, and engage and test these teachings in ways that are truly meaningful. So I'm just going to pause there, see if anyone has any thoughts or questions at this stage.
I have a comment.
Yes.
Not sure which one it is. Maybe you could comment on it first. So once we have in your heart yourself realize that, yes, I've tested many of these teachings. I believe them to be true, and I'm practicing them, and it is all working out for you. And then you have someone you love in your life very dearly who would benefit greatly from also receiving these teachings. But they're not ready or willing or whatever their reason, just like I may not have been earlier in my life. Maybe a way to approach helping them in some way without being, here, try this. This would help me so much. And sometimes people are open to that, but sometimes they're definitely not. Just like when we ask you, can you please teach again? We're requesting your teaching. Do we wait for your friend or loved one to request that teaching or aid in that one?
Yeah. Anyone out there relate to that? Have those experiences in your relationships? Yeah, I think I'm seeing quite a few people. It's a hard thing, isn't it? When we have found something that we find so beneficial, and we see people struggle. For me personally, for such a long time, it was just incredibly hard to see, and just to look and see how, what I would perceive as needless suffering. It was very hard to bear, once you have some experience that it's not necessary, until I realized it is necessary. And even then it's hard, but in this path, the opportunity to be where we're at, and to have alleviated some of those causes for our afflictions, to attenuate some of those struggles, and to see how people chase happiness and in the process create suffering. Just the insanity of that. Is to also recognize that everyone is in their place, right? That this is unfolding on a bigger level than I know. And the pain that I went through, got me on the path I'm at. And for myself with loved ones who, I'm close with, family and so forth, what I found is the best way is simply to be a good example, right? The people will notice the peace, the ease, the difference in you. And in that way, the Dharma speaks very loudly. And there may be those opportunities when people are struggling where we get to offer some guidance without the guise of it being Buddhist, because so much of it is just, human nature and the mind, that some of that advice, we're planting some seeds and some opportunities that can ripen in its own time. And so it's nice to be available to offer the Dharma in ways that people can receive it. And sometimes, I'll speak to the Dharma in a very Christian way. See, some of my friends are very Christian. And in a scientific way to some of my materialist scientific friends. But it's nice to offer methods and antidotes in ways that people can hear it. But ultimately, I think the example, is the best offering. As you've changed over the years, people notice that. And I don't know if she's on here tonight, but one of our people, this whole organization decided to take trainings because they saw how she changed. They flat out told me, we're having you do this workshop with us because we've watched what her life's like. And so I always say, never underestimate the power of being a good example, embodying what you are learning. And yeah, it can be difficult though. Anyone else out there have some advice on that topic? I know there's other people in relationship.
I have another question touching on the good example, the power of a good example. And that's
a short story.
What?
There's somebody trying to talk. Oh, you know what? I muted the speaker because of all those bells. I was wondering why you're so quiet out there. Go ahead, speak, please.
Okay, thank you. So I have a thought about the power of the good example. It's the opposite, is the shame of a bad example. And sometimes, like even as good as I am most of the time, and as good an example as I set, every now and then, way less often than previously, I might lose my temper, or be catty, or not being a good example of the Dharma or mindfulness or kindness. And when I do that, I feel like, oh, they're gonna think this is all bullshit and I'm just a hypocrite. And, so I guess I'm not asking for permission or absolution to be a bitch sometimes, but when I accidentally am, like, what's the power of the bad example to undermine all the power of the good example? and how to deal with that.
Yeah, good point. We can carry a lot of weight if we're, for example, when I was a monk and I'm wearing robes, you're carrying the whole weight of the Buddha Dharma on you. And so, the world sees you. And it's a great responsibility to act in ways that reflect that, even though you may not be feeling that. I remember once in a while, there was a cause for me not to wear my robes. Like I had to go to this meeting or wherever it was more appropriate to wear Western clothes. And I'd like go to the store and I felt like I was invisible, man. Like I could do what I want, and it was so cool. But when I got the robes, wow, and likewise, if we think that, for example, if we're, when I'm a school teacher, whatever role we're in, there's a certain, degree that we'd like to be. But, the reality is robes or no robes, mental afflictions are there. And my answer to that is authenticity. Is that what I found is that people appreciate authenticity. And that, we're going to, from time to time, not be the best example and do things that we apologize for. And that I think in itself is a good example. The opportunity to say, yeah, I'm sorry, I lost my temper with that. The teaching that was given to me on this topic once was a pretty renowned Buddhist teacher was giving this teaching. And the translator, so he's speaking in Tibetan, translator has to translate exactly what he says. So they're doing this back and, teaching. And then he said something that the translator thought, well, I don't think that's correct, right? And so he didn't want to say it. So he goes back and forth with the teacher, and he's asking these questions, trying to be, you don't want to question the Great Lama, but he's, wanting clarity around this and back and forth. And then the teacher realizes he's wrong, right? What he said was incorrect. And huge audience. And the teacher just busts up laughing and says, not a Buddha yet, not a Buddha yet. And points out that he was correct, that was wrong. And it's just like that. It's like when I hear that, I'm not a Buddha yet. And I like to come from a place of understanding that, I think as sentient beings, we're all wrong, right? We're all wrong. If I was correct, then I wouldn't be here in samsara. And so I'm coming from a misperceiving place. And so that also actually leads me to a good point with others, is sometimes I think I know what others need when I need to remember I don't know what they need. I have a perception based on some of my experience, but I really don't know how karma is going to ripen in their life and how 10 years from now a seed would ripen. I don't know. I do know that in my own life, my behaviors in my youth, I'm fairly certain there's no one in high school that would have thought John Bruna would have been a Buddhist monk, just not going there, right? And so we just don't know how these things will unfold. So whether we're a teacher, a role model in any form, or we're trying to be this perfect example, the grace to allow yourself to be where you're at, to be human, to apologize. It does not mean that everything else you did is irrelevant, right? It means that we're a work in progress, and we're a good example, as you pointed out, that I do that much less than I used to. But if we keep striving for, the idea of perfection, we're just gonna, that's too big a burden to bear, and will break, will become brittle. Tenzin Pridarshi speaks this quite often. Don't let, perfection is the enemy of the good. We're a better person we used to be. We're a bitch less often, right?
Right. Thank you.
And that's improvement. And that's the role model. The role model is not someone trying to pretend someone they're not.
Mhm. I guess it's part of the 8 worldly concerns in that, as a teacher of mindfulness, and that's how I identify now, at least to some extent. And that's how people are thinking of me, hopefully. And, and then if I do lose it for a minute, they're like, that's just a bunch of crap. She's just, so it's not that I think I'm a failure, but that I think that they are going to be looking at me and then thinking, well, that's so much for mindfulness, but yeah, that's the other little piece of it. But that's, I can just say less of a bitch. So that will be my not a Buddha yet mantra.
Right. And then that's our work, right? Is to see where our 8 worldly concerns are blocking me,
Yeah.
and worrying about what others think, boom, worldly concern. Versus, people have their own karma. They'll be drawn to your teachings or not. And, see you for who you are. Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah,
John.
it's good work for us. I'm glad you see that so clearly.
Thanks to you.
This is good. I was hoping for some discussion tonight.
I like what you said, John, about, authenticity, that in my mistakes and not living up to the Dharma at all moments, I have an opportunity to be authentically human with whoever's in front of me. Like, I screwed up, I'm sorry. And I see this, I really like the practice of everything is an opportunity. Everything is an opportunity, no matter how it goes, the way I would have hoped or the other way, right?
Mhm.
Oh, and to highlight, I can let people know in my own ways, I slipped here, and this is an opportunity to see a part of myself that I might not have seen, and that I get to work on this now and improve that, because we're, I don't know, society is so, you've got to be right on the mark. And if you slip, there can be that judgment, but normalizing that we are all just human and just like me, right? I'm going to slip. Afflicted stuff comes up all the time, but what am I going to do with it? Cover it over, deny it, argue with people? No, just own it and present it to myself and perhaps to others as an opportunity for growing and improving, that I'm on my path, and those slips are as valid, it's part of the path as living in alignment with the Dharma. So that viewpoint, just that perspective, is progress for me, on this path and the journey. And then I was thinking about the text too. You know, I guess I've been thinking about open-mindedness, right? And faith. And there are more complicated concepts in Buddhism that I don't, I don't get. Quite a ways away from getting them. But enough of the Dharma I have checked out and I am applying in my life, and it's having really positive results. And so I keep my mind open. I don't close the door to these more complex teachings, but I don't necessarily full on adopt them as like, I know this, I believe this, and, because I'm a Buddhist. But my path is, so far, the things I have been checking out and practicing really are bearing fruit. And so I keep my mind open to that and just keep exploring, and I'll know when I know. Um, and so that open-mindedness.
Yeah, critical feature, open-mindedness in a discerning way, I think is, I kind of think a lot about people who, adamantly say there's no, life beyond death, which I think where's your proof? I would love to see that evidence, and we're on the bandwagon. What strikes me as appropriate is I don't know if there's life after death. That's an appropriate answer for someone who believes there is no life, it's a clinging to a faith in something I have absolutely no evidence for. Likewise, then those people who might believe, well, there is life after death. Well, what's your evidence there? And some people have, clearly feel they have very strong evidence. I have a little bit of experience with that, but the point being is to be where we're at with that, but not to close the door in an inappropriate way, right? That discerning open-mindedness you're talking about. Is it possible? Did anyone ever think we'd be talking on little phones like this, have a computer in your pocket, 40 years ago? Inconceivable. Get Smart was using a shoe phone, but he still had to dial, right? And you sit there and think about what we can do today that we didn't even imagine 40 years ago. That open-mindedness you're talking about is, it's like, who knows what we can do, and what we'll discover. Didn't know how many billions of universes there are, and all these things that are unknown. And so this process of open-mindedness, of exploration, of testing that you're describing, it is necessary. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm trying to think of this quote. The biggest obstacle to learning is the presumption of knowledge. And so we can get stuck in that in a Buddhist view too. Oh yeah, I know how karma works. Oh, I know, and we limit ourselves there too. Because what I once knew, even in Buddha Dharma, 20 years later, I know it in a very different way. So that constant open-mindedness, exploration in a discerning fashion with these sort of three objects is something that unfolds methodically with investigation, trial, open-mindedness, and exploration. And above all else, authenticity. No need to try to be where we're not. And at the same time, it is incredibly powerful to aspire to be more than you are. Does that make sense? That we water and nurture the seeds of our becoming by aspiring to be more compassionate, more loving and kind, to see the value in that, to have role models that have shown the way, that are people that, or beyond people that that speak to us in a very meaningful way, that we aspire to grow those qualities within ourselves, which will motivate us to engage in exploration in a meaningful way. So understanding where we're at and embracing a journey of who we can become, or recognize who we are, actually would be a better way of putting that, beyond our limited view, is a real nice dance that we get to do, because the Buddha nature that is beyond the human confines of conceptual mind is already here and knowable. And so having that as a intellectual understanding is helpful, so that we can start to unpack it in a direct way and know it. But it's step by step. And, some of what's in this text is going to be some of that intellectual way that can be helpful. Because we tend to be intellectual, conceptual people currently. Bottom line, though, is, and where my heart is in this, is, are we more loving and kind? Are we more capable of recognizing the confusion of others that leads to suffering? Do we recognize that everything that is happening is an opportunity to cultivate the qualities within ourselves of loving kindness, compassion, wisdom, and that in itself is making a difference beyond our capacity to even measure? And if we can get that on a daily basis, even for, some minutes of the day, an hour of the day, if we can integrate what we're learning into practice in our day-to-day activities, incrementally, just a little more, then there's an incredible transformation that takes place, which you'll have to test, because I'm saying it, but you have to see it for yourself. But apparently Keith concurs, yeah, and so is Rita. So there is a point where what we might see as an outer guru, great teachers, lamas, so forth, can, through these teachings, have us come face to face with an inner guru, which is this knowing that we can experience moments in our day. That is just so clear that, this is what you do. This is the path. This is, how to engage. And it's not that. The line's thinner than we think. So that open-mindedness to explore and to allow, sometimes just in normal contemporary Western psychology, they call it conscience. And sometimes that, there's this thing saying this is wrong or this is right. That there is that accessibility. It's just that so often we're not listening because we're just caught up in our habitual conceptual, way of being in the world. So having some exploration of some of that non-distracted time, and bring into our day-to-day how to attend to someone who's in front of us, and know that person that we may think is living a life that is totally wrong might actually be there to teach you exactly what you need to know about how to engage in life in a way that's meaningful. We start to see everything as a teaching. And recognize that different people are in different phases of this journey. And I'll wrap with, just this from my own experience, and I've shared that more than once. I have received great benefit from spiritual paths and teachers that I would not recommend to anyone today. But where I was at in that exploration got me somewhere, which led me to, the next thing, which led me to find out some things that don't work, where I eventually found some things that work more effectively in my life. So these teachers or spiritual traditions that I would not recommend have actually benefited me greatly, which goes to mean that people engage in that path doesn't mean they're on the wrong path. It might be where they need to be for their own particular journey. And recognizing that we're all in this confused state, maybe we have found something that can liberate us from such a confused state. And it took all those other conditions and teachings and trials and struggles to be where we are now, which doesn't make any of that wrong. As a matter of fact, it provided the ripe conditions for you to be where you're at. And likewise, it might do so for others. Doesn't mean I'll recommend them though. But it also doesn't mean I'll say that they're wrong. Different people have different paths and journeys. There's many methods. So hopefully that makes some sense there. And what I would like to encourage this week is really to embrace some loving kindness. I mean, we're going to have a half-day retreat on that on the 19th. But, my heart just sees that, the times we're living in, loving kindness is so critical. And that's going to be a way to test these teachings. How is your experience when you're coming from a place of understanding that everyone you meet is afflicted and they're struggling? And how can I engage with them in the healthiest possible way? Loving kindness is about that. And recognizing their value, seeing how we can be helpful. Because ultimately, all this Dharma is fundamentally teaching us how to be kind. And it's amazing that we need 84,000 teachings to do so. Oh, it's fascinating how complicated and how many lists and sub-lists that we have just so we can learn to be nice to people. And so let's this week, engage in a test of karma to see how we can experience bringing loving kindness to ourselves and to others, to allow an authenticity about how we're showing up, and know that what we have to offer is meaningful, and we're not Buddhas yet. And if we bring a little more kindness in the world, there's more kindness in the world. And how does that impact our interactions? And how does it impact how we engage with our relatives as well in these times as we're entering into the holiday season? And how does it help us with people we absolutely don't agree with? So that's my encouragement. Please, let's test this karma of loving kindness. See how you do with it. we'll check in next week. The next week, this text, we are going to, get into a little bit of the selflessness aspects. How do we work into a more just an approach of understanding selflessness and how we experience ourselves in the world. All right, let's go ahead and dedicate the merit that we have cultivated from our time together. And I always like to see if I can add in all those others all around the world who are helping others, who are also engaged in activities, people in the war-torn areas, and people that are giving aid, and people are giving comfort, and people are struggling to help those who are homeless and hungry. And there's so much virtue going on in the world amongst the struggles and the violence. There's also an incredible amount of care, kindness, and love. And let us collectively dedicate all of their merit along with ours for the benefit of all sentient beings, that they may be free of suffering. And let us also dedicate the merit for our own continued spiritual growth so that we can be of greater benefit to them. For those of you who would care to, we can recite the dedication prayer with those intentions. By this merit, may I soon attain the enlightened state of Guru Buddha, that I may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare